This is Fountain
Every
Street
week I find
Church.
it hard to find the best ones, but somehow, like I said, you'll hear what I'm trying to say even when the words
Here,
aren't right.
we strive to free the mind, grow the soul, and change the world. Here, there is freedom to doubt and freedom to believe. Here, you can find a house of prayer for all people.
The swallow up Jonah.
Welcome to Fountain Street Church. Join us on the journey.
Beware if the light-skinned race comes wearing the face of death. You must be careful, because the face of brotherhood and the face of death look very much alike. This is an excerpt from the Seven Fires prophecy, a prophecy of the people who immigrated to this land from the Atlantic and eventually became the Ottawa, the Ojibwe. Honoring ancestors is tricky business. We want to embody the best of those we have loved or those we respect. We want to find traditions that express something deep within us, a longing, a yearning. And yet we know too, we know somewhere deep within us that we cannot simply take those traditions. We may take them on, but we must do so mindfully and with respect. As our dancer showed us, taking on her grandfather and that heritage of Judaism. When Fred and I first began exploring the notion of looking at stories of first peoples during this month, something bristled in me, some warning went off, and I thought, I must be careful. There's something that I've just learned that I need to remind myself and this community, and that is around cultural appropriation. For the last 2 years, I have been on staff at a leadership school in Beloit, Wisconsin for youth. And they have talked in terms of creating worship about cultural appropriation and being mindful of acknowledging the traditions that we yearn to borrow from. To be reminded what it means to use those stories, those images, those songs, those symbols. In an article that I used in teaching that group last summer called Wanting to be Indian, When Spiritual Teaching Turns into Cultural Theft, by Mike Johnson. She says, white culture has created an image and called it Indian. But this image is a stereotype and not really informative or accurate about real Native Americans, who are of many diverse cultures. The stereotype Indian has two sides, like the two sides of a coin. One side is the hostile savage, the dangerous primitive warrior who attacked settlers, or the irresponsible reservation drunk who couldn't be trusted. And the other side of the stereotype is the noble savage, the innocent primitive who was naturally spiritual and lived in idyllic harmony close to the earth, the Indian of the Thanksgiving stories who helped pilgrims survive. These can be important visions and contain elements of the truth, these of masculine initiation, feminine deity, and balance with nature, but they are still masks. And a mask is a mask. Andrea Smith, Cherokee activist and member of Women of All Red Nations, points out that the Indian ways that these white New Age feminists are practicing have very little basis in reality, for New Agers do not understand Indian people or their struggles for survival, many of them, unless they have truly joined with them, studied with them, lived with them, learned from them, as I know Mary has, studying with shamans. She reminds us that we live in a colonialist society built on European theft of land, built by conquering and destroying. This isn't something we chose, but something we inherited. It is part of our ancestry too. And in this context, Native Americans identify the use of Native symbols and ceremonies as cultural appropriation, which is a form of racism. What can we do about this? How can we learn and learn respectfully? How can we honor these ancestors, this tradition, learn to live with those around us who practice it still? Well, the author proposes two important steps. The first is to become an ally. Being an ally means being willing to be a beginner, which I feel very much like whenever it comes to talking about race. I didn't learn to talk about race growing up. I learned that issues of race and culture were to be whispered about at home, behind closed doors, not to be engaged straight on, asked about, owned up to. Hopefully we are doing better now. As I was growing up, what I learned about Native Americans was that my reading group was called the Utes, because that was one of the tribes that lived in that area. We learned Native American stories about the land formations, and they were all presented as nifty mythology that maybe we should know. I wonder, does our public education system do any better now? I should ask some people who are in it. I should have asked you before. Becoming an ally means connecting with the community of Native Americans around us. Learning about the struggles, both historic and current. But that is just the first step. The second step is doing our own spiritual work. And the way to do that, this author tells us, the way to do that is to pay attention to what it is we yearn for, that we see in another tradition. Because that tells us something about the state of our soul and our spirit. What is it in the symbol that you see that fills you inside? What is it in the practice of honoring ancestors, whether it is through Dia de los Muertos or ghost suppers or any other tradition that you didn't grow up with? What is it that you yearn for? Honor that, and you will truly be not only honoring your ancestors, but also healing your soul. Questions we can ask ourselves to do this spiritual work. Who is my community, and how do we negotiate the world together? Where do we find our power, and what breaks us apart? What gives us meaning, and what is our relationship to the world? She concludes by saying we need to acknowledge our own oppression so that we are able to fight our own political and spiritual battles.